mushrooms, using a book that was essentially a dummy's guide to building your own mushroom farm. This would be the first product to ever be sold on the Silk Road marketplace. By early 2011, after a year of work on the site, he was ready to launch it to the world. He'd added categories for all different types of drugs. To begin with, the only item listed was the mushrooms he'd grown himself, but the plan was that sellers from all over the world would list their own items for sale. Of course, in order to attract both buyers and sellers to the site, he needed to promote it. Remember, sites on the dark web are not picked up by search engines, and it's also not like Ross could just run some Facebook or Google ads to help find customers for his illegal marketplace. So to get the word out about his new site, Ross went onto several internet forums to spread the word. For example, he joined a site called The Shroomery, for fans of shrooms, and made a post pretending to be a customer interested in using Silk Road. The reason he did this was so it didn't seem like he was promoting his own website. He knew that by casually name-dropping Silk Road, people on the forums would go and check it out for themselves. And they did. Orders soon started coming in. Now, this was all happening at the beginning of 2011, and at the same time, Ross was working at a little bookstore in Texas called Good Wagon Books. But this worked out really well, because it meant Ross had everything he needed to easily ship out his shrooms. Because he was able to use the bookshop's padded envelopes and label maker, he also used a vacuum sealer that normally would keep food fresh to wrap the mushrooms up. So Ross was in business, and was initially shipping off orders twice a week. But as the site's popularity grew through word of mouth, Ross soon had to start mailing shipments out every day as more and more orders were coming in. But even better than that, other people had started selling items on Silk Road. Other dealers had created their own listings, with everything from weed to coke to ecstasy. And of course, more products for sale helped attract even more buyers, and Silk Road initially took a 6.23% commission on every single trade. In order to make people feel more comfortable using the sites, Ross also built a rating system where buyers and sellers could review each other, similar to eBay's feedback system or Amazon reviews. Ross worked tirelessly on the site and was constantly exhausted, but he was also incredibly excited by its growth. When he first made the site, he honestly hadn't been sure if anyone would use it at all, and yet in just a couple of months, he'd already made thousands of dollars in revenue. He told his girlfriend Julia about the progress of the sites. Although she was slightly less excited. Julia was concerned by the fact harder drugs were now being sold on Silk Road, especially when she realized someone had even started selling heroin on there. Her doubts about the whole thing started to grow, and she asked Ross, what if someone overdoses, or sellers send out stuff that's been tampered with or laced with something else? Ross confidently reminded her of the rating system. He said if someone sells bad drugs, they'd get a bad rating and no one will buy from them again. Julia simply said, yeah, but how are they supposed to give a bad rating if they're dead? While Silk Road had been growing fairly quickly through word of mouth, growth started to get crazy once Gorka wrote an article about the sites. Right after that article went live, many other news sites started writing about Silk Road as well, describing it as an underground website that lets you buy any drug imaginable. Even big TV news networks like ABC and NBC began talking about the site, thus bringing it even more attention.
Thousands of drugs came through the black website called Silk Road.
Of course, not all that attention was good. Multiple different government agencies were now watching the site and beginning to investigate who was running it. But because of the use of Tor, they knew tracking whoever was behind it would be extremely difficult. Meanwhile, Ross started working on Silk Road full time. He had no choice really. It was going so much quicker than he ever expected. The site now had hundreds of sellers and thousands of buyers. And whilst Ross had sold all the mushrooms he'd grown, he was now making commissions on every sale from the site. As more money rolled in, it was exhilarating. But one morning he opened his laptop and noticed someone had now listed guns on there. Ross tried to rationalize that it was an American's constitutional right to have a gun, so this wasn't a problem. However, once again, his girlfriend Julia saw it differently. Ross, you have to stop this, she pleaded. Think about why someone would need to buy a gun anonymously. Ross and Julia argued about this, and Julia went off to her friend Erica's house to vent. Julia had become increasingly paranoid about everything Ross was doing, and so she confided in her friend Erica about Ross running Silk Road. She made Erica promise that she'd never say a word about it to anyone, and for a while, it seemed like she'd kept that promise. However, one morning Ross logged onto Facebook and saw a public post on his wall from Julia's best friend Erica saying, "I'm sure the authorities would like to know about Ross Ulbricht's drug websites." Immediately, panic filled his body, and he broke down in tears. A wave of emotions crashed over him. Firstly, he was angry Julia had told someone else that he was running the sites. Secondly, he felt heartbroken that she would betray his trust like that. But mostly, the strongest emotion he felt was fear. He immediately deleted Erica's post off his Facebook wall and phoned her in tears, begging her never to mention it to anyone again. As for why Erica had made the post calling out Ross in the first place, it had all started when Erica had had a bad trip from a substance she'd bought off Silk Road. And when she got back from the hospital, she'd got into a fight with both Julia and Ross, which had ended with Ross telling Erica to leave. Erica, in an intoxicated state, had then posted on Facebook as revenge. Luckily for Ross, he'd seen the post quickly enough, meaning the post was deleted before hardly anyone saw it. And it was only their Facebook friends who would have been able to see it anyway, who probably assumed it was just a joke. So the crisis seemed to have been averted for now. But this incident made Ross extremely anxious. Julia and Ross's relationship also ended, as Julia refused to let Ross keep running the site from her apartment. She issued him with an ultimatum that he had to close the site down or leave. He chose to leave. In fact, after the Erica incident, Ross decided he needed to temporarily leave the country, just as a precaution, and so he went traveling. Ross went to Bondi Beach in Australia to relax. He went to Vietnam to celebrate the Lunar New Year. He even backpacked through Asia, hopping from different islands and staying in youth hostels. Of course, the travelers he met along the way had absolutely no clue Ross was running the biggest illegal site in the world, and that he was now worth millions of dollars in Bitcoin. Life was good for Ross. The only downside of traveling was that Ross often had to rely on internet cafes to access Wi-Fi so he could run the site. And he was understandably anxious about people seeing his screen and realizing what he was doing. Thus, he always had to pick a spot in the corner of the internet cafes. And he also programmed his laptop so that by pressing a certain key, he could immediately turn his screen black, just in case it felt like anyone was looking at what he was doing. The thought of getting caught was especially terrifying because he was technically a wanted man all around the world, since Silk Road was a global site. And the thought of ending up in a prison in Southeast Asia, where people had been known to get hanged for selling drugs, was particularly scary. The site's rapid growth also presented other problems. Turns out, Ross trying to build an entire marketplace by himself had meant the code was filled with bugs. One particularly bad coding mistake meant that briefly when someone purchased something on Silk Road, Ross lost money on the transaction instead of gaining money. Ross had no choice but to temporarily block new signups on Silk Road whilst he desperately tried to fix the issue. Ross was now working round the clock on the site trying to manage all these new issues that kept popping up, like attacks from hackers who demanded ransoms in Bitcoin, complaints from customers, and packages that had been seized in the mail. As word about the site continued to grow, Ross realized that just like any other growing business, he needed employees to help him. So he started recruiting internally by hiring active users of Silk Road to help him manage everything. Soon he had 10 employees, some rewriting his shoddy code, some moderating the Silk Road forums, and others dealing with support issues and disputes. Whilst Ross was technically paying these staff, most of them viewed it as more than a job, because they all had similar political views, and together they felt they were building something big here, and that Silk Road was going to change the world. Meanwhile, many other product categories also started popping up on the site. For example, some sellers started offering spy software and tools to hack into people's webcams. You could also buy passports and fake IDs, or even counterfeit cash that looked just like the real thing. And in one case, someone had even listed a rocket launcher for sale, and another was trying to sell cyanide, a well-known poison. Then one day Ross woke up to a message from one of his moderators saying, "Should we let people sell kidneys?" Turns out one user on Silk Road wanted to sell various human body parts. The seller added that they'd all been acquired consensually. Ross was obviously a little concerned. This wasn't quite what he'd envisioned when he initially started the sites. But the way he saw it, Silk Road was merely a platform. Just like Facebook or eBay, it was the users who chose how to use it. It was against his philosophy to tell individuals what they could or couldn't buy and sell. He wanted a free market, so he didn't interfere. And as a result, the wide variety of illegal products for sale on Silk Road continued to grow, which continued to attract even more attention to the site. What's interesting though, is Silk Road actually became a bit of a community. Many viewed it not just as a marketplace, but a movement. On the community forum, Ross even introduced a Silk Road movie night, where once a week, many Silk Road users would all start watching the same movie at the same time. Ross's first film choice for this movie night was V for Vendetta, and the movie's anti-government theme was definitely popular with the Silk Road community. Silk Road also started running some competitions to help gain new users, where people could win various illegal substances. However, there was one incident where the competition winner ended up disappearing right after winning, and some presumed he'd overdosed on the prize. Ross joked that perhaps a better competition prize would have been rehab. There was a particularly active user on Silk Road who went by the name Variety Jones, and he started helping Ross find bugs in the site's code and create a plan to help grow the site further. The two of them started chatting via private message every single day and became close friends. But in a bizarre way, he was kind of like a business coach to Ross. Whoever Variety Jones was, he clearly had a lot of experience with the drugs business. One day, Variety Jones messaged Ross saying, not to be a downer or anything, but what we're doing falls under the US drug kingpin laws, which provides a maximum penalty of death upon conviction. The mandatory minimum is life. Ross was very well aware of this, although he generally tried not to think about it. However, Variety Jones said he had a plan. The two of them were both fans of the movie The Princess Bride, and in that film there's a feared pirate called Dread Pirate Roberts. Except it's not just one person, the name is passed down from person to person over the years. Variety Jones said Ross should change his name on Silk Road to Dread Pirate Roberts, instead of just the username admin which Ross had previously been using. Ross loved the idea, because this way, if Ross ever got caught or connected to Silk Road in any way, all the blame couldn't be pinned on him. Ross could admit he'd once been the admin of the site, but he could say that just like in the movie, it was a title that was passed down from person to person, and he personally was no longer involved. He could claim someone else had taken over as Dread Pirate Roberts instead. From that moment forward, Ross went by Dread Pirate Roberts, or DPR for short. And him and Variety Jones continued to chat more and more. They'd even sign off each day to each other with messages like, "Sweet dreams, Captain." Before connecting with Variety Jones, Ross had been feeling incredibly lonely, since obviously he couldn't tell anyone else what he was doing, especially not after what happened with the Erica and Julia instance. Ross had to lie to all his family and friends about his life. In fact, he told them he was a day trader, so they assumed he was just on his laptop so much because he was trading stocks. But now, having this digital friendship with Variety Jones helped him feel less alone. He now had a literal partner in crime. Of course, it wasn't all perfect. As the site continued to grow in popularity, there were multiple incidents where hackers managed to steal Bitcoin from Ross because of issues with the site. Or they would attack the site and Ross would have to pay them a ransom in Bitcoin to stop. Luckily, Ross was making so much money by this point that the hackers getting some Bitcoin from him didn't actually matter that much. It was just a normal day at the office. Ross had never believed the site would get this big. By the time the site was a year old, it was estimated to be getting at least $500,000 worth of sales per week, which meant a lot of commission for Ross. Plus, around this time, the price of Bitcoin was rapidly increasing, so all the money Ross was making from the site's transaction fees was suddenly worth a lot more. By the end of Silk Road's second year, it reached almost 1 million users, and Ross's personal net worth was reportedly tens of millions of dollars, most of which was Bitcoin stored on thumb drives scattered around his apartments. But Ross told Variety Jones that by the time he was 30, he wanted to be worth $1 billion. And incredibly, it looked like it could actually be possible. They just had to keep expanding. Within 2 years of launching, Silk Road was at nearly 1 million users. By its peak, if Silk Road was a normal company, it would be called a unicorn, the label given to businesses valued at over $1 billion. It was unbelievable, really. A guy in his 20s running the world's largest illegal empire from his laptop. Ross had a slightly surreal moment whilst visiting the country of Dominica, where he realized Silk Road was worth more than the entire country's GDP. But occasionally, Ross would get a brutal reminder that the empire he was building did have some very real-life consequences, like when he saw this on the news.
The synthetic LSD that killed the president was bought online, so potent it made him think he could fly. He fell from a balcony and suffered horrific head injuries.
Ross listened to the story of some kids who'd purchased a party pack from Silk Road, containing a synthetic drug from China, made it in an unregulated lab. The kids had heard about the site, simply gone online, followed the guide about how to buy Bitcoin, made an order on Silk Road, and the items turned up in the mail. Easy. But when one of the kids took it, he started panicking. He suddenly didn't know where he was or what he was doing. The room was spinning. He got up and started running. He had no idea where he was going and ran straight off the hotel balcony, falling 30 feet into the parking lot below.
I would just absolutely love to have seen what he turned out to be.
No matter what your thoughts on Ross, you've seen what can happen if your browsing isn't protected. I think we can all agree we want to keep our personal information private and secure, and that's why I want to tell you about today's video sponsor, Guardio. Guardio is a browser extension that can keep you and your family safe online. It detects threats in real time before they cause harm, and blocks phishing links, malicious websites, unwanted notifications, sketchy extensions, and many other types of threats. As opposed to traditional antiviruses, Guardio can actually scan sites and files before you access or download anything harmful. And since the browser is where we store payment details, emails, crypto wallets, passwords, addresses, and more, it's crucial to keep your information secure and have real-time protection and alerts, making Guardio the perfect way to protect your vulnerable info. They already have over 1 million users worldwide, and were recently even featured by Google. I've started using it and added my family members, which is no extra charge, and took control of my online safety, and I hope it will help you do the same. If you want to take control of your browsing security today, use my link guard.io/magnatesmedia and get a limited time 50% off the first month, so that's only $5 a month to keep 5 family members safe. The US government was devoting more and more resources to the search for Dread Pirate Roberts. But considering multiple different government agencies were working on the case of Silk Road, like the FBI and the DEA, it might surprise you that the biggest breakthrough of all came from an IRS agent making a simple Google search. Gary Alford was a tax inspector who'd been assigned to the Silk Road case to try and track some of the money being laundered. However, he had pretty much no knowledge of Bitcoin, Tor, or anything else to do with Silk Road. What Gary did have in his favor was that he was very detail-oriented, and he read everything 3 times to make sure he never missed anything. Gary also liked to think outside the box. His favourite ever criminal case was how they caught the serial killer Son of Sam, who went on a killing spree in New York in the 70s. For a while, no matter how many detectives they put on the case, nobody could figure out who the killer was. But then one day, an officer decided to take a different approach, and look for cars in the nearby area that had received parking tickets around the same time of the murders. The logic being that the murderer would hardly be concerned about running back to top up the parking meter whilst in the middle of killing someone. They found a pattern where the same car had received parking tickets on the night of the murders and always located fairly close to the scene of the crime. They then traced the owner of the car, and that led them straight to the murderer, who confessed. Gary liked this case because it proved you could outperform more experienced people by looking at the problem differently. And Gary was convinced the founder of Silk Road must have left a similarly small mistake behind, the digital equivalent of a parking ticket. Gary started his search by asking, what's the earliest post about Silk Road on the internet? Since he figured whoever started the site would have had to drum up interest in the first place. So Gary went to Google, typed the Silk Road web address into the search box, and using advanced search, he filtered by date, looking for results only from early 2011, which is when the Silk Road was rumored to have started. Only a few search results came up, and one of them was a post from a user called Altoid on a forum called The Shroomery. The post sounded more like a user, not the creator of the site, but it was the first record online of someone mentioning Silk Road. So Gary searched for other posts by a user called Altoid from around the same date, and stumbled across a post on another forum called Bitcoin Talk, where someone with the same Altoid username had posted, has anyone seen Silk Road yet? It's kind of like an anonymous Amazon.com. Gary thought it was interesting that the first mentions of Silk Road online were both coming from this same username, and this person had been promoting Silk Road on multiple different forums right around the time that Silk Road launched. So Gary looked through Altoid's post history on the forum, and a few months after Silk Road started, Altoid had made another post saying IT pro needed for a Bitcoin startup. It was a job ad for a Bitcoin related project. But inside the post read, if interested, please send your answers to the following questions to rossalbrecht@gmail.com. Now, when Gary told his colleagues about these findings, they dismissed that. They said just because this user was the first one to publicly post about Silk Road didn't mean he was the creator, which is true. They certainly needed more evidence to prove anything. But the more Gary looked into this Ross Ulbricht character, the more convinced he became that this was the guy behind Silk Road. First, by searching the name Ross Ulbricht, Gary found Ross's YouTube channel, containing videos about libertarianism, along with a saved video about how to get away with stealing. But also, Ross had used the username Oh Yeah Ross, which was interesting because whenever Dread Pirate Roberts messaged anyone or wrote on the Silk Road forum, he'd always write yeah, not yes or yeah, always just yeah. It was a small detail, but perhaps more than just a coincidence. Secondly, Gary found Ross's LinkedIn profile, which had anti-government posts. Ross had written, the most widespread and systematic use of force is amongst institutions and governments. So this is my current point of effort. The best way to change a government is to change the minds of the governed. To that end, I'm creating an economic simulation to give people a first-hand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systematic use of force. Thirdly, they found a coding question related to Tor posted on Stack Overflow, which had been posted by a user called Ross Ulbricht. But within a minute of posting, he changed his username to Frosty instead.